The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the David Pakman Show. I am not David Pakman, but I am Benjamin Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Show, filling in for David. Pat, how's it going?
Great to have you here. I'm doing well. Nice vacation, and now we're back at it.
Yeah. Welcome back. You know, we missed you guys. It's I'm becoming a regular around here, so glad you guys have me yet again. So let's jump right into the news. I'm not sure if any of you have taken the necessary pain that is required to go through Donald Trump's AP interview. It is both simultaneously incoherent and disturbing. The sentences that he actually was able to string together to make a complete thought were disturbing, were very unnerving, but then even more so unnerving was just his consistent inability to give a complete thought. Let's bring a couple of, it's actually a transcript. Let's bring a couple of images up on the screen. Let's read the first one. And this was, and actually, Pat, switch back so I can set this one up. Now that I see, this is something that I posited on my show early on in Donald Trump's presidency, where he doesn't know an issue. And so he takes whatever talking points his team gave him. And so once he learns a little bit about the issue, Pat, we talked about how he circle backs and changes his mind on it, almost a complete 180. And this is what's happened in this first quote with regard to NATO.
And that's why you have to know what you don't know, right? So you don't just take the positions of your closest advisors. Right,
exactly. And then so that you don't have to turn and change your mind in the middle of it. But this is what the first quote does from the AP. Take a look at it. He said, in regard to NATO, he said, they had a quote from me that NATO's obsolete, but they didn't say why it was obsolete. I was on Wolf Blitzer. Very fair interview. The first time I ever was asked about NATO because I wasn't in government. People don't go around asking about NATO if I'm building a building in Manhattan, right? So they asked me, Wolf, and asked me about NATO. And I said two things. NATO's obsolete. Not knowing much about NATO. Now I know a lot about NATO. NATO is obsolete. Let's take it there. So it's a little bit more. You can read it, but that's the key part right there, Pat, that he finally admits that the reason he said NATO was obsolete is because he didn't know anything about NATO. And now that he knows something about NATO, well, all of a sudden it's not obsolete. Why are we dealing with this learning curve for a president who is turning a complete about face on every single issue because he didn't know anything about the job before he got it?
Well, that's your takeaway from this quote. I think that the more telling part is that last sentence there where it says that, you know, back when they did NATO, there was no such thing as terrorism. That's completely wrong. There have been 4 waves of terrorism going back at least to the 1880s, starting with the anarchist wave, and then there's a new left wave. And we've seen like a rise in religious fundamentalism since the 1970s. But the idea that terrorism wasn't a thing when NATO came around is completely false.
Well, and also he's saying that NATO didn't focus on terrorism. So that to him, the other part of it is the qualifying relevance of NATO is whether or not they focus on terrorism. Like that, he tries to give that as a way out. But yeah, to me, the thing that stands out the most is that he just doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know the job. And he's not intellectually curious enough to actually even Google this stuff, to check Wikipedia, let alone use his advisors of all these professionals, all these career experts that could come in and inform him. Instead of doing that, he doesn't even Google. Like he didn't know about, and I think we talked about this on the show with you last week or 2 weeks ago. He did not know the relationship between China and North Korea substantively enough to realize that he could not just tell China to throw the hammer down on North Korea. And so this is exposing yet again that he doesn't know anything about the job that he signed up for.
And his excuse for not knowing much about NATO was that he was a businessman for most of his life. Well, then don't run for president. You don't have to know the inner workings of NATO if you're just running a business, working at your hotels and your golf courses. But if you decide to make the choice to run for president, then you got to know a little bit about it.
You got to learn the job. You got to learn the job. And here we are as American citizens having a president. Literally, I remember Republicans used to complain, I'm choosing my words very carefully here, complain incessantly about Barack Obama learning on the job. No, we are quite literally engaged. We're in the middle of a presidency, or at the beginning, rather, of a presidency where this guy is learning on the job. Now, this was just the first part. I'm actually a little amazed that he admitted his ignorance. That's almost redeeming a little bit, but it gets worse. Let's look at the next slide. In regard to the defense contract with, he said, I saved $725 million on the 90 planes, just 90. Now there are over 3,000 planes that are going to be ordered. On 90 planes, I saved $725 million. It's actually a little bit more than that, but it's $725 million. Okay, either it's a little bit more than $725 million, or well, anyway, that's okay. We'll keep going. But the point in this particular transcription, this particular point in this transcription, is that he's actually taking credit for something that he did not do. Right? This has already been debunked. This is not something that he negotiated. This was something that was already in the process of being negotiated by the Defense Department, and that was carried out completely outside of his negotiation skills.
He likes to take credit for other people's work. He claims that the job numbers during their transitions was credited to him, even though Barack Obama was still president.
Right. So this actually occurred long before the election even happened, but he took credit for it. Now, this is still, we haven't even gotten to the most amazing parts, the incoherent nature of this interview and the narcissism of the interview. So let's take a look at the next part. And this is all in print. So this is him getting caught in the middle of a lie. He said, Trump, okay, the one thing I've learned to do that I never thought I had the ability to do, I don't watch CNN anymore. The AP says, you just said you did. And then Trump said, no, if I'm passing it, what did I just say? The AP replied, you just said, Trump, where? 2 minutes ago. This is hilarious as I'm reading it. Trump said, no, they treat me so badly. No, I just said that. No, what I said, I stopped watching them, but I don't watch CNN anymore. Pat, I feel dumber every time I read Donald Trump. Not listening to him, like listening to him, you could hear the hustler in him. You could hear he's just a fast talker. He's trying to get over on people he thinks aren't smarter than him. But when you sit down and read his words, the fact that he lied in the middle of a single sentence, once in the same sentence, he reversed course and lied, said, I don't watch CNN, but I watch CNN. And then he's being called out by the AP. But then you see the incoherent nature of it. It is, I feel like IQ was just literally draining out the side of my ear.
I think what he was trying to do there was insult CNN by saying that, they're fake news. I can't even stand to watch them anymore. But he always has TVs going on in the background, and sometimes maybe Fox is on instead, but he's watching CNN.
Yeah. And I wonder if I wonder if he's so used to getting away with lying because people around him, when you're a billionaire, who's really going to call you on your lies? Who's really going to be that person? Like I like to, I'm not even a millionaire, Yeah. I'm not even 100,000 there, but I like to surround myself with people who will call me on my crap or will expose like what I need to improve on. I think once you get to a certain income level, people are just so ready to be your yes man that they're not going to tell you that you lied. And so now he's finally being confronted with journalists who will say, no, Mr. President, you're lying.
And it's not just that he's rich. He's also someone who inherited his wealth. So he came from a position where he just deserves everything he has, and he's like an heir to the fortune.
It actually gets worse. Everything we've done so far is really not even the bad part. Let's go to the next one. He said, you did put out, though, as a candidate, you put out a 100-day plan. This is from the AP. Do you feel like you should be held accountable to that plan? Somebody put out that concept of a 100-day plan. He's not even taking responsibility for his contract with America. I don't know. Let's keep going. I don't even want to give any more commentary on that. It's so obscene, so absurd. This is the next clip, the next segment. He said, Trump, in regard to WikiLeaks, I never heard of WikiLeaks. I never heard of it. When WikiLeaks came out, all I was saying was, well, look at all this information here. This is pretty good stuff. No, I found it very interesting when I read this stuff and I said, wow, it's just a figure of speech. I said, well, look at this. It's good reading. Okay. Then AP followed. This is how he talks in writing. The AP followed up, said, but that didn't mean that you supported what Assange is doing. And Trump said, no, I don't support or unsupport. Pat, what the hell is unsupport?
I have no idea. And is he talking about the 2016 election WikiLeaks, or is he talking about back in 2010 the Chelsea Manning situation? Because he should know about that.
I'm sure he should know about that, but I'm afraid to draw that distinction only because he's going to make us look as ridiculous as he is, because he could be talking about nothing, and that's quite frankly what he does. And I know this type of person. I know this type of personality. If Donald Trump wasn't a billionaire, he'd be a side street hustler, someone who's just talking really fast, trying to get over. All right, this one is the one that really bothers me. He said on air, talking about CBS Face the Nation host John Dickerson. Dickerson had 5.2 million people. It's the highest for Face the Nation, or as I call it, Deface the Nation. It's the highest for Deface the Nation since the World Trade Center. Since the World Trade Center came down, it's a tremendous advantage. Pat, in this clip, in this segment, he's talking about the ratings that he got when he was on Face the Nation with John Dickerson, and he compared the ratings that he got with Face the Nation to the ratings. I don't even know why you would say ratings in September 11th in the same sentence.
Yeah, he's been using 9/11 to his advantage for a long time. Even after the towers came down, I think it was maybe a week or so after, he was boasting about how his building in downtown Manhattan was now the tallest in the area.
And it's painful to consider that his narcissism runs this deep, that he's comfortable. I mean, he's demonstrated, you're right. This should not be surprising to me because he's done it already, but he's demonstrating yet again that he's willing to use the lives that were lost on September 11th as props for his own personal gratification.
He also claimed in a debate that he lost hundreds of friends in 9/11, and then when asked to name just one of them, he couldn't do so. Hundreds of friends would mean that he knew at least 10%, I guess, of the victims there.
So in one interview, you see him caught in a lie in the middle of the same sentence. You see him admit to not knowing anything about the job, not knowing anything about NATO. And then you also see a masterful display of his gross narcissism, that he's so gross that he's willing to compare his ratings when he was on Face the Nation with the ratings that the Face the Nation got after September 11th. This is our president. I was going to say this is your president, but I guess he's as much mine as he is yours.
It is really tough reading those quotes and having to see who they're attributed to at the bottom there, and having to put President Donald Trump. Yeah. It's a sad situation.
I have nothing else to say about that, Pat.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So last night, the state of Arkansas executed Marcel Williams and Jack Harold Jones on the same night. This is the first time since 2000 that there has been a double execution. And in 2000, it was Texas. Texas was the state that put two people to death. Last night was not uneventful, to say the least. There were complaints that the first inmate to be put to death was actually struggling during the execution. More precisely, they're saying that it looked like as though he was gasping for air. Because of that, there was an initial stay that was passed by the judicial system there in Texas, in Arkansas rather, but it didn't last. They came back very shortly, 45 minutes later, and put the next inmate to death. This is in light of Governor Asa Hutchinson's Republican governor of Arkansas desire to put 8 men to death before a prescription, a cocktail that they use in the execution expires at the end of April. And so in almost an unprecedented fashion, he streamlined and fast-tracked the execution of eight people that were on death row. And so far, they've carried out, I believe, 3, if not 4 of those executions. Pat, this really goes into the conversation about the death penalty in the first place. Why, as a civilized, quote unquote, civilized nation, why are we still continue to pursue and execute people? Number one, pursue the death penalty and execute people, to be more precise. But then number two, you look at the European Union. You can't even be a part of the European Union if you are a nation that still carries out the death penalty. Why in America are we so obsessed with the death penalty such that we're going to fast track the execution of 8 men, and one of whom had DNA evidence that they were not even willing to review?
Yeah, it's pretty insane. The fact that these drugs were set to expire and it's not easy for them to get more because they have to go to Europe to do so. And of course, European companies are not willing to do something because they are not in support of the death penalty themselves. And this also really just cuts at the constitutionality of the death penalty, because if this is not cruel and unusual punishment, I don't know what is.
Right, and I think it's all levels and measures of what you consider cruel and unusual. For some of the people that were there, some of the journalists that actually reported that the first inmate was gasping for air, to them that was cruel and unusual. To the court system, it wasn't. And the problem was that they had a hard time. It took them 45 minutes to find the vein that they needed in the neck of the first inmate because he was so overweight, and that became arduous in itself. So 45 minutes for them sticking him, 45 minutes to find the place for the needle to go in. Like, I mean, and this is probably a bad comparison, but if it takes my phlebotomist more than 2 tries to get a needle into me, I'm losing it, right? But imagine compound the pressure of this is your execution. You're dying. You've had your last meal, and it takes them 45 minutes to find your vein. Then you're gasping for air, and now you're a second inmate looking at being aware of this because your lawyers are filling you in about this, and you're looking at a cruel. I mean, it's obscene in my opinion.
Yeah, and there's 3 drugs to that cocktail. So the first one puts you to sleep, the second one paralyzes you, and then the third causes cardiac arrest, right? So if you're missing one of those drugs in that cocktail, that's pretty important, because you could be experiencing a burning sensation and you're fully conscious during it, but you can't speak, you can't make any claims, so all you can do is gasp for air.
And this is what they're saying, that Marcel Williams and Jack Hereford demonstrated signs of consciousness, right? And so is there any humane way to actually execute somebody? I mean, that's really the question. Yeah, it seems like, they just fall asleep, but now we're at the point where we're in such a hurry, right? So we're speaking to the cultural problem here, the morality problem. We're in such a hurry to kill these people that we're willing to expose them to an inhumane death.
Is there a humane way of killing? Probably not. There's a gas known as hypoxia, which will actually create some euphoric sensations before someone passes away from oxygen deprivation. But the problem with that is if people can just hold their breath, Of course, breathing is involuntary at some point, but for minutes on end, you can be just choosing not to breathe in that gas. So the fact that you have to participate in your own execution, I think that even that method, which is the most humane thing we can think of, it would be cruel and unusual.
What bothers me the most about this story is Asa Hutchinson, who uses religious terminology to justify it. He's making it seem as though this is part of his moral responsibility to carry out state-sanctioned executions, right? And he uses his religious, his Christian faith almost as a justification as to why he's doing this, because he has a responsibility to as governor and a responsibility to God. And once you enter that into the equation, to me, Pat, it doesn't complicate the situation to me. It just exposes the hypocrisy, right? The level with which these people who claim to be Christian or whatever version of Christianity they have, they're so ready and willing to use God as a justification for state-sanctioned killings, when even if you take their own religion at their own word, this is something that Christians should not be behind, but Christians are the #1 people behind this.
And of course, we live in a secular nation, so that argument should be null and void to begin with. And it's most important when lives are at stake here, potentially innocent lives too, because we know that 4% of people on death row are actually innocent of the crime.
That's the last thing I'm going to say about this, right? So even if you take this, let's start here. You're right. This religious justification that Asa Hutchinson and the other people use should be completely outside of the conversation. It should not even come into the conversation, but they inject it in the conversation. And if you're going to inject it in the conversation, then people like me have to call out the hypocrisy that, of all people, religious people, Christians should be suspicious or against the death penalty for many reasons, least of which is the fact that, like you said, the number of innocent people who actually get executed should be completely unacceptable. Whether your morality is based on religion or just your own personal morality, it should be completely unacceptable. But yet it's the same people time and time again who use it as a justification as to why they should carry out these executions.
And I think the innocence argument is the top argument against the death penalty, because we can have a conversation as to whether someone deserves that, or these theoretical discussions of does that punishment fit the crime. But if we're executing the wrong people, then that just goes out the window. That should be at the top of the list.
That should be at the top of the list, and unfortunately it's not. And so we've seen a beeline, streamlined execution process in the state of Arkansas, some of which have led to what some journalists are considering inhumane deaths. The French election has shaped up to be what many people are considering a replay of the 2016 U.S. presidential election, comparing the centrist neoliberal Macron to Hillary Clinton and the far-right xenophobic Marine Le Pen to Donald Trump. It seems to be shaping up as a referendum on neoliberalism versus fascism, and we'll unpack that accusation or that position in a moment. But just to show you some of the results, Emmanuel Macron got 23.9% of the vote, which was the largest share, rounded up to 24% on your screen. Marine Le Pen got 21.3%, Fillon 20%, Mélenchon 19.6%, and the rest are, you can see, were not even remotely in the competition. Mélenchon is the far left, more of the socialist candidate, even further left than Bernie Sanders, but he was compared to Bernie Sanders here in the United States. The one thing that stands out about this to me, though, is that as of today, so far today, Mélenchon or Mélenchon, depending on who you ask, has not come out to endorse Macron. And he's saying with Macron that he's really having to go back to his supporters, Pat, to figure out who he's going to support. Here's the thing for me. There should be no, excuse my words, there should be no question who you should support, right? Because Marine Le Pen is borderline a Holocaust denier, 100% xenophobic, 100% against plurality, any type of religious plurality, she has demonstrated to be probably the worst. If you look at the triumvirate of Trump, Nigel Farage, and Marine Le Pen, she's probably the worst. So I get opposition to neoliberalism, but we're talking about fascism. So for Mélenchon not to have endorsed him at this point really bothers me.
And I hate to compare this to the American experience, but it's just too tempting. It has a lot to do with the people who were on Bernie's side during the primaries, but were unwilling to back Hillary during the general election. And the result of that ultimately was a man that was far worse than Hillary Clinton becoming president, someone who was far more right-wing.
And here's the logical fallacy of it all, right? So this is going back to the original premise, which is the premise that people are positing, is that this is a referendum between neoliberalism and fascism. And here's where I disagree with that, right? If you take neoliberalism as an economic concept, deregulation, privatization, defunding the entire concept of the public good, if you take that as the economic concept, every single thing that you hate about Hillary Clinton, the same things that you hate about Barack Obama, same things that you hate about Macron in France, every single one of those things is not only present in this version of fascism, it's present in Donald Trump, present in Nigel Farage, present in Marine Le Pen, but it's magnified.
Right.
It's like neoliberalism squared with the added bonus of xenophobia, racism, and ethno-nationalism.
Yeah, and it's hard for a lot of people to suck it up and vote for a candidate whom they have many disagreements with, but ultimately is the lesser of two evils compared to the two. We'd like to think that Macron will be able to run all over Marine Le Pen in this runoff, because I think he's polling something like 10 points higher. All the other defeated candidates will probably back him, because given the alternative, he's just a much better option. But a lot of us had the same hubris about Hillary Clinton when it came to our own election in the United States.
I'm going to be honest with you. I think Marine Le Pen is going to win, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I just see the writing on the wall, right? It's hard not to recognize the far right-leaning ethno-nationalism, xenophobic movement on the national stage, on the international stage. And so, and then if we are comparing it to the 2016 election, it's the confidence. You said hubris, but definitely hubris and confidence, overconfidence that they got it in the bag. And so if they have that overconfidence there and they have not learned the lesson from Hillary Clinton versus Trump, it's very, very likely that Marine Le Pen will pull this out.
And that would have major consequences because Marine Le Pen becoming president of France would probably mean France pulling out from the European Union. Yeah. And with France and the UK out of the EU, I think that's the end of the EU there.
Right, which if you look back, if we were to fast forward 50 years and look at any international conflict on the European continent, we would be able to trace the roots of that conflict back to Brexit and Marine Le Pen withdrawing France from the EU, right? Because this is one of the most important facets of the EU has been their ability to keep war off of the European continent since its foundation. So this is why Mélenchon not endorsing Macron at this point is doubly disturbing to me for many, many reasons.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
So Donald Trump, as expected, is having a hard time finding a way to fund his great border wall. He has suggested that he'd be willing to shut down the government in order to get funding. Now, originally, we all know, Pat, that he was going to get Mexico to pay for the wall. Yes. Mexico, the former president, Vicente Fox, made it very clear with language that we can't use that they're not paying for this blank wall. And so the current president also let it be known that they're not paying for the wall. Donald Trump's trying to find a way to make Mexico pay for the wall. Ultimately, we all knew Mexico was never going to pay for the wall. So now he's trying to strong arm Congress into finding funding. Even wrote out Attorney General Jeff Sessions to say that we're going to find a way to pay for this wall, all the way up to being willing to shut down the government. Here's the squeeze. He's finding out the political toxicness, I don't know. Toxicity, thank you. He's finding out the political toxicity of shutting down the government. And so now he's rolling back this idea. He's backpedaling, saying that maybe he'll find funding in a different way. So perhaps he's gun shy. Maybe he's finally been tamed and thinking that, when he came in, he was guns blazing, thinking that he could do anything and everything he wanted. And now he's realizing he can't without Congress.
Yeah, and that would be amazing if Republicans shut down the government while they have both houses of Congress and the presidency. I mean, it kind of makes sense when Bill Clinton was president or when Barack Obama was president because there was disagreements there, but over some people in the same party, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I mean, I believe the deadline is coming this week, and it's coinciding with the culmination of his first 100 days. And so Donald Trump is looking for a win. Ultimately, he's just trying to find something. They even floated this week whether or not they would bring back the health care debate, whether they would try to pass a repeal of Obamacare. They can't even get that done. So Donald Trump's scorecard, legislative scorecard, is like 0 and 10 in his contract for America that he, according to the AP, when he said to the AP that he never really had a contract with them, he had 10 pieces of legislation there that he was going to go after in his first 100 days. This was his contract, and he's got nothing done.
Of course, you have plenty of time afterwards, but the first 100 days is your honeymoon period. Right. It's the time where you have the greatest mandate. People are in support of you generally. Not so much in his case. The biggest accomplishment he can really cite is the appointment of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Right. All he had to do was pick from a list of names and get the Senate to approve it. Right. So that's a bad report card. That's
a horrible report card, and it signals that he's like I said, he's been tamed. He's been broken. He's been housebroken into the reality that you're not a dictator, that you can't just come in and you can't tell a sovereign nation what they're going to do. You're not going to force them to pay, but but then two, you're not going to tell Congress, even your own Republican Congress, you're not going to tell them that either do this or I'm shutting it down. He's finding out very quickly how tenuous that situation is.
And he talks a big talk when he's in front of his audience and he has his own little comfort zone there. But he actually met with Enrique Peña Nieto, I think a little bit before the election.
Right
and they
before,
didn't even discuss payment for the border wall.
Right.
That should be at the top of his agenda for the meeting there, but he didn't have the courage to do it.
He did not have the courage, the temerity, and he was very low energy. I remember that interview. Very extremely low energy. So I don't think Donald Trump wants the job. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm just going to say this, but he can't handle being in a position where he has to actually answer to and consult with so many people about every decision that he wants to make. I just don't see that he really has the longevity. I don't think he's going to make it personally. I don't know if he's going to make it.
And I'm sure he's the kind of guy that will delegate out plenty of responsibility. We see Mike Pence taking over a lot of areas, as well as Jared Kushner.
While he goes in golf.
Right. But you still have to conduct interviews. You still have to respond to the press. You still have to deal with Congress. I mean, you can't just take away everything from the job title.
I think he really believed that he could rule this as a dictator. Like, for the very thing that Republicans complained about with Barack Obama, they said he was ruling by edict, is the very thing that they wanted Donald Trump to do. And he's realizing now that even with his own party, he can't do it.
Yeah, and if you just take a look at the executive orders, he's doing so at a far higher rate than Barack Obama or his previous predecessors did. And it's particularly interesting because he has both houses of Congress on his side. So you'd think he'd be able to pass whatever legislation he wants to.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. I'm tired of talking about Donald Trump. Let's shift gears. So this is a topic that I've intentionally tried to avoid since the election, and that's the relitigation of the primaries, and more precisely the argument between what is the future of the Democratic Party. Does the future of the Democratic Party lie with Bernie Sanders, or does it lie with someone like Tom Perez? Now, this is despite the fact that Tom Perez and Bernie Sanders are on a unity tour across the country. There seemed to be an unlimited supply of pundits and commentators who want to bring more division than actually exists. There seems to be a lot of unity, Pat, around Bernie Sanders. The polling around Bernie Sanders is he's the most popular active politician, very popular even amongst Hillary Clinton supporters, where, matter of fact, only 3% of Hillary Clinton supporters view him in a very unfavorable manner.
I think that's really saying something, too, because I think, there are plenty of people out there who disagree with Bernie Sanders, but they may still be willing to approve of him because they know that he's an honest guy and has been the same on policy for the past 30 years.
Yeah, and very consistent, very, very consistent, which makes this article from Salon.com even more hilarious. I invited Anna March, who is the author of this article, on to actually discuss this. But in fairness to her, I just asked her maybe an hour before the show. So this is not a reflection on her not being willing to discuss it, more of the fact that it should be discussed. And Anna, if we get a chance, we should talk about this article. But I'm going to talk about it right now. It's entitled, "Bye Bye Bernie. He's Not Fit to Be Captain of the Democratic Ship If He Can't Stop Chasing the Great White Male." Right. So she sets up and in fairness to Anna, this is the last time I'm going to give a caveat. This is not her original thought. This is not her original argument. This is something that has been pervasive in the Democratic Party since the primaries. It's a lie that has been pushed all the way through, and it still exists. But this is the straw that broke the camel back for me. I've been trying to avoid it, but I just can't take it anymore. It's like I try to get out, but they pull me back in with this ridiculous false premise and straw man.
So the idea here is that Bernie Sanders doesn't speak enough on behalf of race issues in America and a number of other examples.
Race issues specifically, and abortion. This article is actually about abortion. It's actually positing and forwarding the idea that Bernie Sanders is not a progressive because he does not have a good position on abortion. And actually, I want to read a couple of, she said in the article, I don't think we have the quote for this one, but I'll read it. She said, we may have it. "Yet Sanders has made it plain that abortion rights are negotiable and brushes off identity politics. This is the most flagrantly wrong accusation that I've seen made in such a brash fashion. Bernie Sanders has a better position on abortion rights than Hillary Clinton. And so to forward this sentence, to just drop this sentence in the article without any context, without any justification, without any evidence is obscene. And then she goes on to say that he's also brushes off identity politics. I've never seen Bernie Sanders brush off identity politics. I've seen Bernie Sanders do the exact same thing that I do, that you have to qualify it. Identity politics are important, but you cannot have it alone. This is the example that Bernie Sanders has given, and I've given it plenty of times. It's not enough to be a woman running for office, especially if you're a woman running for office who is going to do things detrimental to women. Taking case, Catherine Pugh out of Baltimore. Baltimore ran for mayor. She's a black woman, intersectional feminist, all these great things. However, she voted against let me be more precise. She vetoed, after the city council approved $15 an hour minimum wage for the city of Baltimore, the black woman mayor of Baltimore vetoed it. Now, it's not enough. You could be a woman, you could be black, you could be, you could be LGBTQ, you could be all these things, but identity is not enough. That's the justification, and that's the clarification that Bernie Sanders makes. It's the same distinction that I make, and then to put this in an article to continue getting clicks off of this drivel where Bernie Sanders has a great white male Hulk problem is nothing more than an unnecessary relitigation, and it's divisive at best. So here are some other quotes from this that are just completely ridiculous. She said, with regard to Bernie Sanders, that he routinely divides matter of race and gender and class, which again cannot be untwined, by discussing the pain and needs of working class voters and perpetuating the dangerous myth that Democrats have ignored them. Democrats have lost the working class. Yes, they got an overwhelming amount of black working class voters, which she cites in this article. But you have to understand, and I'll talk for black working class people. When we vote with the Democratic Party, because I very much so working class for a long portion of my life. When we vote with the Democratic Party, we're not voting for the Democratic Party. We're voting against the Republican Party, because the Republican Party, on top of being detrimental to our economic livelihood, they are also bringing the added bonus of racism, right? So many times African Americans, we vote against the Republican Party more so than for the Democratic Party. But that's a distinction, and we'll keep going. But this idea that Bernie Sanders doesn't care about race, let's play this. This is just one clip. You can do a random search on Google and find Bernie Sanders giving unequivocal support for the African American community on issues of race. Let's watch this clip.
Let us be very clear. While we have overcome a lot of racism, we have come a long way, we still have a long way to go. It is not acceptable to me, and I know to you, that an African American baby, a male baby born today, if we do not change things, stands a 1 in 4 chance of being in prison during his life.
All right, so that's just one randomly Googled clip of Bernie Sanders on race. If you actually were sincere about this critique, you would see that Bernie Sanders has a very long, rich history of supporting issues of race. But this is the one that's the most disingenuous to me, Pat. It's the fact that she has the nerve to say that Bernie Sanders is that being pro-choice. This is actually her quote. Being pro-choice is not an optional part of being progressive. Full stop. And then she accuses him of making being pro-choice as being optional. Here's the problem, and here's the context that she's trying to set this in. Bernie Sanders has come out in support of Heath Mello in Nebraska. Heath Mello is a Catholic. He is personally pro-choice, and he essentially has the same exact position on abortion as Tim Kaine, Joe Biden, and a number of other Democratic pro-choice Democrats, to be redundant. So here is Bernie Sanders coming out in support of Heath Mello because he wants to make sure that we keep a progressive wave going. But they have found that this is an opportunity, and by they, I mean the Democratic establishment, particularly pundits who want to use this as a divisive tool. They have decided that they're willing to scorch this race with Heath Mello because this is an opportunity for them to divide and separate Bernie Sanders from being the de facto leader of the Democratic Party. Here's the problem. Bernie Sanders has a better position on women's rights, reproductive rights, and abortion than even Hillary Clinton. So what's the most absurd part of this entire conversation, Pat, is that Bernie Sanders in many ways has a better position on unequivocal support for women's rights and abortion rights. Let's take a listen to Hillary Clinton on abortion and Bernie Sanders on abortion.
No, I have been on record in favor of a late pregnancy regulation that would have exceptions for the life and health of the mother. I object to the recent effort in Congress to pass a law saying after 20 weeks, no such exceptions, because although these are rare, Brett, they sometimes arise in the most complex, difficult medical situations.
All right, so that's her position, which is not, and I don't want anyone to mistake it. I don't think her position is unreasonable, right? But she's made an exception. She has a distinction. 20 weeks, there should be some regulation. Here's Bernie Sanders, though, who is even further to the left than me on this issue, who says the government should not be involved in it whatsoever. Listen.
Question of me being okay. Thank you for the question, Brett. I happen to believe, and let me be very clear about it, I know not everybody here will agree with me. I happen to believe that it is wrong for the government to be telling a woman what to do with her own body.
And this is to the same exact question, to be clear. Bret Baier asked them, do you support an exception for late-term abortion? Bernie Sanders, no. Hillary Clinton, with some exceptions. And again, I don't necessarily disagree with Hillary Clinton's position, but I disagree full-heartedly with this incessant need by political commentators to draw a division, to create and exacerbate a division in the Democratic Party around Bernie Sanders because they don't like Bernie Sanders as being the titular head of the Democratic Party. I can't help it if Bernie Sanders is as popular as he is. I can't help it if he's consistent on his policies. I can't help it if he has a better position on abortion than Tim Kaine, the vice presidential candidate underneath Hillary Clinton. He does. He is the most popular Democratic active politician in the country right now, and there's no amount of articles that you can write to undo that.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So, City of New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu has begun the process of removing 4 Confederate memorials. This process started on yesterday. Now, this is not the first time the City of New Orleans has tried to do away with these Confederate memorials. And to be sure, these memorials expressly, one of them, the first one that came down, expressly endorses white supremacy. Actually, on the monument, the phrase white supremacy is there. And again, this is not the first time they've tried to remove it. 1981 and 1993, they tried twice, but there were over 31,000 signatures collected between those 2 times trying to prevent the monuments from coming down. Well, finally, after all of the effort, these 4 monuments are coming down. And I want you to understand the kind of situation that they're in. The workers who dismantled it had to wear flak jackets, helmets, and scarves, and they also had to conceal their identities because of concerns for their safety. This is how deeply entrenched the Confederacy is in the South. And we're not talking about just simple monuments. These are actual monuments to to say the treacherous Confederacy is one thing, but it's Confederacy combined with the white supremacy. So, and to be sure now, this is, there are arguments over whether or not the Confederacy is heritage or hate. We don't really have time to go into that, but I want you to understand how clearly enshrined white supremacy was on the obelisk that was taken down today. Between 1932 and up until 1993, the monument had a plaque on it that said that the national election of November 1876 recognized white supremacy in the South and gave us our state. So this is not really Pat, a question of you know, oh, the Confederacy is our family, is our heritage, our legacy. You know, we'll argue about that another time. We're talking about clearly enshrined white supremacy in monuments that took, I mean, took 3 efforts to get down.
Yeah, it's literally written in stone there. It's as clear as you can get. And, you know, luckily we're seeing the trend of the Confederate flag being taken away from government buildings. But it takes a long time. You know, Mississippi didn't officially ratify the 13th Amendment banning slavery until 1995.
Pat, you never cease to amaze me. I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, and I grew up in Mississippi. But Mayor Landrieu, this is what he said about it. He said the removal of these statues send a clear and unequivocal message to the people of New Orleans and the nation. New Orleans celebrates our diversity, inclusion, and tolerance. This is not about politics, blame, or retaliation. This is not a naive quest to solve all of our problems at once. This is about showing the whole world that we as a city and as a people are able to acknowledge, understand, and reconcile, and most importantly, choose a better future. I could not agree with him more. It's not about relitigating the past. It's simply about saying that we don't have to stay here and that we can move to a better place. So that's Mayor Mitch Landrieu of New Orleans. So the Cato Institute, which blows me away on face value, Pat, that the Cato Institute shared this. It's more of a libertarian-leaning outfit, but they reported on a General Government Accountability Office report that states that traditional right-wing extremists make up a vast majority of domestic terrorist incidents. Now, they're citing data between September 12, 2001 and today. Since September 12, 2001, there have been 85 violent extremist incidents that resulted in death. 62 of the 85, which represents 73%, were committed by quote unquote traditional right-wing violent extremist groups. 27%, 23 of the events, 27% of the total were committed by quote unquote radical Islamic violence. So this goes against what most people fear. Right, the general fear, Pat, in the society is that you're going to get attacked by some type of Islamic terrorism, and this is the entire push that we have in the government is like 100% behind, you know, getting rid of radical right-wing terrorism, but I mean getting rid of Islamic terrorism. But the real threat in the United States since September 11th has been right-wing terrorism. Right,
and the top reason in the world for terrorism at this point is radical Islamic terrorism. But in the United States' experience since 9/11, it's been right-wing terrorism. I think environmental terrorism even ranks higher than Islamic terrorism.
And to be sure, right, so I'm sure one of the first things people are going to comment and say, well, why didn't he include September 11th? Why did this research not include September 11th? Well, you know, based on the methodology that they use, they're not counting the number of people that were killed. They're counting the number of events. So technically, they could throw in September 11th and still get about the same results. So you would go from 85 violent events and go to 86 violent events, and then you would still have 62 of the 86 from radical right-wing traditional terrorists, and then 24 would be. So it doesn't really change the analysis. When you talk about violence and terroristic violence here in the United States, we have more of a reason to be fearful of Billy Bob, if I could be stereotypical, than we do Ahmed.
Yeah, and I mean, the right-wing talking point, at least as far as Donald Trump is concerned, is that we have to eliminate Muslim immigration into the United States because of the threat of terrorism. Right. But given this study, and we've actually known this for quite some time, people like me should be profiled, right? It should be young white males because in instances of terrorism, that's the group that tends to do it the most in this country.
Should I leave? I feel threatened now. I feel
unsafe.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to make
there's
light.
some distance between us at least.
Okay. I have enough room to run. I'm sorry to make light of a very serious topic, but here's the next part of this, right? There's a reason that we're afraid of Ahmed and not Bill, and that's because our media. According to the same study, they examined LexisNexis, and they pulled together reports between 2011 and 2015, reports on terrorism. There was 449% more coverage of radical Islamic terrorism than there was traditional right-wing terrorism in the United States. 449%, compared to the reality that since 2001 rather, 73% of the violent experiences that led to death in the United States has been at the hand of right wing. So our media, they're complicit in this perception that we should be afraid in the United States, to be clear, that we should be afraid of radical Islamic terrorism, when the reality, the real threat is traditional right wing terrorism.
And of course, racism plays a big part into that too, because typically when we think of Muslims, we think of people from the Middle East. So there's this outsider perspective of trying to fear the other that the media likes to play up. And then there's also the tactics that the terrorists use. So maybe radical Islamic terrorists would be more inclined to use bombs rather than guns. And we have a gun culture in this society, so we're not as fearful of that.
Right. That's a great distinction, right? We really won't even consider in many cases what one of these people would do as terrorism. We won't qualify it as terrorism, and that's probably plays a huge role in it as well. We also have a president who will say everything about radical Islamic terrorism and say absolutely nothing about right-wing terrorism that has had an uptick since he was elected. So that plays into the equation as well. But there's one last thing, and I want to get your last word on it. One last thing that plays into this is the fact that, if you think about it, if you look at the commercials that are run on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, the commercials that are run are coming from defense contractors, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin. They run, and if you think about it, there is no money whatsoever for the defense contractors in waging a war against right-wing terrorism in the United States. There is plenty of money in waging war against Islamic terrorism abroad. So if you think about it, there's a vested interest into keeping the conversation being about 449% more coverage on radical Islamic terrorism, because there's actually money in the fear that Americans have of radical Islamic terrorism.
Yeah, and that conflict is patently clear, because I don't know about you, but I'm not out there buying aircraft carriers and planes and ammunition and all this stuff. It's directly to appeal to the media outlets.
100% so. It has absolutely nothing to do with the audience that's watching, because there's not a single person who's watching MSNBC who's going to buy something from Lockheed Martin. But you said it best. So, but this is the problem, and there's so many layers of responsibility to this. But the fact of the matter is, in the United States, since September 11, 2001, there have been more incidents of traditional right-wing terrorism than there has been radical Islamic terrorism. Yet there has been 449% more coverage of Islamic terrorism than traditional right-wing terrorism.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.